Welcome back to Streets and Eats. This is episode 58. And today on the podcast, we're talking about travel tips, traveling with children. Welcome to Streets and Eats, the travel and food podcast dedicated to taking our listeners to the sights, sounds, and flavors of fascinating places near and far, both on and off the beaten path. We're Jim and Corinne Vale, and we've been traveling internationally and domestically together for decades, visiting more than 90 countries in all 50 states in the USA. We'll share all of the local knowledge and food expertise we've gathered through years of living as expats in Asia and Europe, as well as traveling with families spanning multiple generations around the world. Join us each week for a new adventure.
We love traveling with children most days because sometimes it can be challenging. That's true. And so lately we've been, planning on our summer travel. And of course, that always includes our adult children and our grandson and sometimes nephews and nieces or friends of children. And so it seems like no matter where we go, we're always traveling with children. And this summer, we're taking the grandson away from mom and dad for about 4 days and traveling across countries with him. We're picking him up in France and taking him to Germany so we can take him to the Playmobil Fun Park, because I am a huge fan of the Playmobil Fun Park.
You would spend all your money on Playmobil, I think, if you could. That's like your Lego addiction.
It is, because it's what I like about it. And this is, I'm not sponsored by them, folks, but
we should be.
What I do love about Playmobil is they have a lot of cultural things that come up that you can, like we had the Amalptrieb or the coming home of the cows down from the mountains, which is a huge thing in all over the Alps, the Alpine region.
And they also have like city life things and castles and Vikings, all kinds of really cool stuff.
Roman stuff, Egyptian stuff.
As well as just your regular, construction vehicles.
Everyday things that kids love.
With. It's a lot of fun. And we're really looking forward to that. And it's a bit of a challenge to travel with children. People who travel with children already, I don't think really even think about it, because if you started traveling with your children early on, everything's really just natural and it kind of works.
Well, that brings me to my very first piece of advice. And that is, just as you said, start as soon as you can traveling with your kids, as soon as you can. That means if your kids are now teenagers and you've never traveled with them, start now. But it also means that if you're a young adult who is just starting a family and you love to travel and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to do that as much, I call BS.
That's right.
We traveled when our kids were infants. We camped all over Europe. We did road trips with them. We flew with them. We did everything with them from the time they were born, well, until present, obviously.
Yeah.
And we've done that also with our grandson. And we feel that learning anything, we're former educators. So learning anything is a progression. You don't maybe take the hardest thing you would ever do and do it first. For example, you're not going to start skiing on the Black Diamond with all the moguls and go as fast as you can down a ski hill. You're going to go on the bunny slope.
That's right. And
so
slow.
When you apply that to travel, you need to take them on an overnight trip. Then you can do a weekend. Then you can do, a week-long trip. And then, and it'll grow exponentially fast, because once the kids get used to traveling, they're pretty into it, and they'll tell you the rules.
That's
after
right.
a while.
And that really is the key, start small, whatever age your kids are. When you start traveling, start with something small, get them used to it, and then just build it up and build it up. And before you know it, they'll be taking you on a 2-week driving trip through Japan. Like our children did.
Yeah.
Once they were older. As
they were, I would still say young adults, they planned a trip for us, a 2-week road trip through Japan. And Jim and I, our job, we paid some of the money, of course, but not all of it. They paid for themselves. But basically our job was to sit in the back seat, enjoy the view.
Yeah.
And, just have fun. We didn't plan a thing. They did send us the itinerary ahead of time in case there was something we wanted to add to it.
Right.
Or whatever. But we were pretty happy with what they picked. So
and they definitely used some of the tips that we're going to be talking about today. Tips for traveling with children. I guess it could even be tips for traveling with parents,
Anyone.
if you are the child, taking their input. I mean, that's a huge tip.
It is a huge tip.
Give them buy-in.
Okay, so as you were growing up, what was the most important thing to you? The most important thing is that things were fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're traveling, what's fair? You getting a choice of what you're doing. Just as much, you get a say in what's happening just as much as somebody else does. So whether or not that's true, depending on the age, you can give even your toddlers who are talking a choice. Today, do we want to go to a museum or do you want to go to the cooking lesson, if that's a choice for the day? Or you could say, do we want to stop and go swimming in the lake or do we want to wait until we get to the hotel and go swimming in the pool? There are so many little choices that you can give your kids as the day progresses, as you're planning your itinerary, that they will feel empowered. They will feel
right,
like they're part of this trip and that the trip is for them as well as for you.
Now, what you don't want to do though is give choices that are like not similar. Like, for instance, you don't want to say, would you like to go to the playground or go to the museum? Because you know it's going to work out.
And you should be going to the playground anyway.
You should be going to the playground anyway. That should not be a choice because they need that time. They need to be able to get out and run around wherever you happen to be, wherever that can happen. They need to do that.
For a while there, Jim and I were looking for playgrounds with a view. And what that means is, for example, we were in Segovia in Spain. And Segovia, as you may know, is on this big jutting out piece of land where the big like castle is, and it's beautiful and you can see it from the city as well as see it from a different part of the city. So here we were in this playground with this amazing view behind us, and I mean, how can you beat that? So we've done that all over the world. We found a playground with a view of Mount Fuji.
Right.
We just really cool stuff. So you can still feel like you're getting a travel-ese type of thing. Plus, when the kids are playing at playgrounds, they might be interacting with the locals. And what a great way to do that. And you can interact with their parents because all parents want the same things and all kids want the same things. So you have that commonality. And it's a great time to ask, start talking about the kids and say, by the way, after this, we're heading to dinner. Where would you go? Where's a good place to go? So it works out.
Where do your kids like to eat?
Don't forget those playgrounds.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Getting started early, I just wanted to talk about a little bit about
our experience.
Yeah. So we got started really early. Devin was 3 months old when we just threw everything into the back of our car, including a tent and a camp stove, and off we went through Europe on a road trip for about 3 weeks, camping and just having a great time. Now, when we started, I don't think we necessarily had all these tips yet. We definitely learned as we went, but we also didn't let it stop us that we didn't know about traveling with kids. We knew we wanted to travel. We had a car. Let's go.
And let's face it, if you're going to starting with infants is a piece of cake.
Yes.
Because they're just one little bundle. Well, I mean, they're a little bundle that comes with a huge diaper bag, maybe with full of stuff that you need. But that's okay. It's still very controllable. Mm-hmm. Infants are happy when you hold them. They're happy to sleep anywhere in the world. They're just, they're pretty easy.
They're not picky on what they eat because
where they sleep.
They're eating what you give them. And yeah, it's actually, life is pretty easy for traveling with infants when you think of that. Yes, there's more to haul around. You've got your hands full all the time. You have to think about things like strollers and diapers and getting water for your formula or where you're going to breastfeed, all that stuff. But you have to do that stuff anyway at home. So if you do it while you're traveling, A, you get to travel, but B, your child is being immersed in travel from an early age so that it just becomes a natural part of life.
On that trip, especially, like we said, Devin was an infant, and we had driven from Germany down through Switzerland, a little bit into Italy, over into France, and then into Spain, and then back again. And in Europe, it was such a time where they thought that the parents needed some time to eat their dinner without the infant. And so pretty much every dinner restaurant we went to, at some point during the dinner, a lady would come out from the back of the kitchen, whether she was the cook or the mama or the waitress or somebody. I mean, I don't know, but there was always someone, and they would come take the baby and talk to them in their language and, coo and tickle and whatever,
bounce
and
them around,
walk her around, meet her everybody. And meantime, we're eating our dinner and having a good time. But, you are the parents. So
it's a little bit worrisome
we
at
would
first.
be very happy every time it happened. And Devin was a very easygoing kid, and she didn't mind being, she was 4 months old. It wasn't a big deal. But after about 10 minutes, I'm like, gosh, I hope they're bringing my baby back. And of course they always did. I mean, it was a very safe atmosphere. But, as a parent, you always get those little twinges like, oh my gosh, my baby's out of my sight. But it was fine.
It was always fine.
She's all the better for it, I'm sure. But that was one thing that happened to us. And you just have to go with the flow.
And she was kind of an icebreaker in a lot of situations.
Absolutely.
So really a great way to just meet local people and talk about family and life in general. So
that was
really
our
cool.
first trip. And then, of course, we had a second daughter, and we did the same thing with her. And from infancy all the way on up, we've traveled with both of them. We've traveled with groups of kids. We've gone on school trips that are overnights with kids. We've gone on Girl Scout trips to other countries. We've hosted people from all over the world to give us that kind of thing. We've taken kids that are their friends, or we've had kids that we met other places come visit us and show them around where we're living at the time. We've had lots of that. Like when we lived in Europe, we had a whole, schedule of people coming to stay for a couple of weeks to a month.
You were always taking kids off with Girl Scouts. There's all kinds of stuff.
So there's lots of ways that we've traveled with kids. And I think that we really garnered some good tips and ideas. And I think the second most important thing, after just saying go now, doesn't matter how old they are, start now, start right away, start planning a trip and go for it,
small and work up,
is when you're on the trip, whether it's on an airplane or if your 2-year-old starts throwing a tantrum on the boardwalk in Santa Monica Pier or wherever you are, relax. We've also found that as we travel, things tend to just work out.
That's right.
And we're not the only people that have kids. Everybody.
The whole world has kids.
Most of the world. I mean, there are people who choose not to have children, and they may be a little bit more surly about it. But they're the minority. Like so far, like what? 1% of the population at best, I mean, really, if you're out with your kids and they start doing something, you watch people's reactions. Depending on the situation, of course, you're going to get everything from maybe a mild annoyance to, oh, I feel for you looks like, gosh, I've been there. You can just feel the empathy, or even the amused, oh, you poor thing. Been there, done that.
Not me.
You lived through it, but it's okay. Chuckle, chuckle.
Well, that's just it. All around the world, everybody who's raising children has raised a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and they're all at some point in time going to go through some sort of tantrum like that. So at the time that it's happening, it's not pleasant, of course. I mean, nobody wants their child screaming around them. But at the same time, you can kind of, if you think about it, let go of the stress of worrying about what other people think.
Exactly. Just deal with, like, if he or she was throwing a tantrum at home. And, how would you deal with that behavior?
That's right.
I would not yell at them, because then people will pay attention to you.
Yeah, and that's just not a good tip for dealing with a tantrum anyway.
But in general, I mean, if that's what you do, that may not be the time to yell at your child. But it's a good time to pull them aside, give them a hug and say, look, I know you're sad about X, not getting that candy in the store, whatever it was. But, maybe at the end of the day, we'll get something special. You can redirect a 2-year-old or 3-year-old pretty easily. So, your kid and you know what works with them. But just remember, no one's really looking at you.
No.
And if there is one or two, I mean, they're the exception, not the rule. So just deal with your child and try to relax and not have the anxiety about what people think. So I think those are two huge.
Yeah. And if you can let go of that anxiety, really the situation is a lot easier to diffuse, because otherwise your stress, your anxiety is just building the whole problem and adding to the problem, making it worse.
And we all know as the children get older, their challenges of dealing with them. And of course, when you're traveling, everything seems to be, more of a microcosm and, like a magnifying glass on it. But like even teenagers can be a real pain, right? Maybe teenagers are the hardest to travel with, but we'll talk about that a little bit later or even in another podcast because we have a lot to talk about. But the bottom line is you got to think about your kids, involve them in the trip, give them things to do that will keep them occupied during the boring times. And also, what is the biggest question kids always ask?
Are we there yet?
How far is it? When will we get there? I'm hungry.
I can definitely remember in the back seat of our Volkswagen van when all 8 of us kids were tooling down the highway on a road trip with my family. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I think all 8 of us would ask at some point in time. So, that's really easy to deal with. Instead of waiting for the question, just keep popping out there. 1 more hour to go. 30 more miles.
Look, there's the mileage sign. Oh, it says 23 miles to the national park. We're almost there. It'll be about half an hour. Or if you're in Europe and it's in kilometers, it's like, wow, it's even faster. Isn't that nice?
Well, and my parents were really good. And I would do this with our girls too. Instead of saying, are we there yet? Or when are we going to be there? Instead of just answering with the answer, I would answer with, well, it's 50 more kilometers or 50 more miles, and we're going this speed. You tell me when we'll be there, and have them do the math. Because that way they're doing math.
That's when they're a little bit older.
Well, of course. But the other thing is, they're still children at that point.
That's true. The other thing is, we gave our kids maps. I know maps are a thing of the past, but we gave them a map.
It's hard to find a good map these days.
Very, very, very early on. And we showed them where we were going. And I think you could do the same thing with the phone and GPS.
Oh, yeah.
You could just have them, find the area.
That's one of my big tips, getting everybody involved. So one way you can get everybody involved is to start a Google map, your own Google map that you share with everybody. And then everybody has access to the map on their phone, on their whatever device they happen to be using. They can add things to it that they want to see, pin places they want to go. They can look at the route. You can even mark a route on it so that everybody can see where you're going to be driving and look for things along the way. So that's a really good way to get everybody involved. A Google Doc to write on and a Google Map where you can pin things that everybody wants to do.
I think that works for the planning, but as you're in the car, for example, you can pull it up on your iPad and you can say, well, we're on the path. We just left Rouen. And now we're heading towards Paris. About how far do you think it is? And they can, and that might be way off. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's just a way for them to be involved and for you to have a discussion and talk about how, like Jim said, how fast you can go and what's happening. And it just makes the kids feel so much better. And I've got a little story about that. So we gave our kids maps from day one.
Yes.
And they learned how to read them. I couldn't tell you when they acquired the skill.
At what
it was
age?
A progression, but I do know when they were teenagers, I took Devin and Erica and we went with my friend and her 2 children on a road trip to England. And of course, the navigator is usually the other adult in the car as a general rule. So she took on that navigating task and flubbed it so ridiculous. It was just, I was doing U-turns, driving on the wrong side of the road as far as I was concerned. And it was getting a little stressful. So finally I was like, can I please hand the map to the girls? Because I'm used to the way they navigate. What I really wanted to say was they're much better at this than you are.
Right.
But of course I didn't. So we did get the map to the girls. And from then on, it was much smoother because we have developed as a family this, not only that we trust them and knowing that they know which road we have to take because we've done this enough times, but also knowing that when we're in a city, everyone stops talking when we're trying to find something. And we know this. And you sit in our car. It's very obvious when we pull it into the city limits and we're looking for a hotel. The car is silent. The
The
only
music
talking
is off. There's no talking.
That's right. The
except for
only
help.
talking is, okay, you need to look for Rue de Saint Baptiste or whatever it is, and then everybody is looking for that road. And everybody is working together to get us to the hotel. And we've established that as a routine as our kids were growing up. So they're well aware of how to do that.
Yeah. And it's not just maps for road trips, but maps in the city too, for just getting around, walking around, using the subway and whatnot.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I
actually, I think the kids are much better at GPS than we are.
Oh, yeah. When Devin went to Paris with her grandparents and other cousins on a big trip after, I think it was their high school graduation. So they were teenagers at that point. They were traveling around the city and basically getting lost, just going to subway stops or metro stops and buses. And at one point she said, "Let me take over the map, please. I'll get us where we need to go." And she did. And they still talk about that to this day, how great they are with maps.
And she was 18. In our opinion, she learned that skill so
much
many
earlier.
years prior to that it wasn't even a question. But a lot of people will look at a high school senior and think that they're still not old enough to do it. Erase that thought from your mind. The earlier you start giving your kids these tasks that are really meaningful as far as travel, the more buy-in they're going to have and the more happy they're going to be, the more well-adjusted they're going to be in life. So it's just great all the way around.
Well, that's one of the reasons we travel, to become better people.
Absolutely.
And
okay,
that's
let's
one way
get
it
back
does it.
to some tips.
Yep. Well, we talked about using Google Maps. The other thing you can do with the Google Map is use different colors to identify things that maybe you want to do or things that are a must, like orange, green, or blue colors, things like that. I also like it because you can use different icons for food or scenic points or amusement parks, that kind of stuff. So it's really easy to see.
And what's really nice about it is that you can, as you go, you can say, okay, well, we didn't end up going to the zoo. Well, we can take that off the map if you want to, or start another map, whatever. But you could put a photo up. You can put a little description up there. It can become the journal.
That's right.
A travel journal. So it's really cool.
It's very cool. That's a great way to travel with family, I think, with kids.
I love Google Maps.
The other thing is, a lot of people think that if you're traveling with your children, you have to avoid places like museums and churches and things like that.
Again, erase that from your mind.
You really don't need to. What you need to do is balance. And
How many times have you heard life is a balance?
Right. And even traveling together, you and I, we'll go to one museum a day.
Because we don't want to be
type thing a day.
Yeah.
Because any more than that, and we're done.
Yeah.
Traveling, let alone doing anything else. Museums, for instance, still do those. Museums, churches. While you're there, look for areas where the children can play, because more often than not, you'll find them. And even if there's not a specific area to play in, there a lot of times is a central square or a plaza out front, or like one of my favorite museums is the Bishop Museum in Hawaii. And in between the buildings there's a huge grassy area. And part of it is a really nicely sloped, really
like a little hill,
really gentle hill
down to the sidewalk
that goes down. And it was perfect for rolling on. So we were out there with Astor sitting on the grass, having a drink in between the buildings. And
he had not turned 2 yet, or he had just turned 2?
2 yet.
He was not quite 2 yet. So we're talking probably a 20-month-old.
But he was walking and getting around. And now there was plenty to do in the museum, because most museums will have a kids area for sure. But at the same time, you're still in a museum and you have to be kind of quiet and walk around. But outside, in this big open area, I taught him to roll down the hill on the grass, and we just had a blast out there. And he got to really
expend some energy. Mm-hmm. And that's the key. That's part of the balance. The balance of education versus fun. The balance of being more sedentary and standing in one line or one place and looking at something versus being active. The balance of fresh air versus inside air. There's just so many things that you think you kind of do in your daily life. You do it kind of,
Anyway,
anyway,
hopefully.
But when you're traveling, you just might want to think about it a little bit more when you're traveling with kids, especially the younger they are, the more they need to have that balance of getting out and just being able to run wild, just being able to, whether it's at a playground or like Jim said, in the middle of, a lot of places have playrooms. So take them to the playroom for 15 minutes. Like even here in Vietnam, we just took Astor to the War Remnants Museum because of course he loves everything transportation. And out in the courtyard of the museum are all these old world Vietnam air helicopter and tanks and all that kind of stuff, which he was
vehicles.
And he was fascinated by that. Well, the rest of the museum is not really that kid friendly, but what they do have on the second or third floor,
top floor,
is a playroom. They had books in English and in Vietnamese. They had a big play mat. They had toys. They had puzzles. And so Jim and I took turns. I went around first and read all the things about the Vietnam War and how depressing it was.
Well, the American War, as they call it.
And the Vietnamese call it the American War. And then as Jim watched Astor and played with him, and then I took a turn, watching Astor, and he did that. And that way, Astor did not see any of those gory photographs. Or
they just weren't appropriate for him.
It just wasn't.
But at the same time, for families traveling with children, I think it's an important museum to go to for the parents, for the adults.
But our point is, and you don't really necessarily know that. We knew it was the War Remnants Museum. We knew that in the courtyard there were these things that he would like. That's about the extent of our knowledge of it before we went there, which might be how you go to any museum, right? Then you get in there and then you have to maybe think about what's happening, and then you might need to adjust as we adjusted. But luckily they had a playroom, so that was fine. But we've been in other museums like the BMW Museum in Stuttgart, Germany. What a great museum.
That is one of my favorites.
And it's all about the history of BMW. And they had interactive places as well as they had all these things kids could do. They had, when you checked in, you could get and they have these in a lot of museums where you get a scavenger hunt a questionnaire type thing that you answer, which are good for certain ages. But they also had a painting thing. They went out and painted on a car outside.
Yeah.
And they just, washed the car down every day and repainted it the next day. And the kids just had a blast. So there were, as you're looking at things to do, you can still combine the education with something that's going to be memorable for the kids something that's going to be fun for the kids.
Yeah. And there's almost always something like that specifically for children, whether it's like the Junior Ranger program in
national park
museums, that sort of thing.
Which we love doing, and we're in our 60s.
They're always there. And if they're not, like I said, look for those open air areas where they can get out and run around and chase pigeons or play tag or whatever.
Well, like Jim was saying about the museum, our rule is one museum a day. Very rarely do we do more than that. And if we are doing more than that, it's the exception, not the rule, because that's sort of our personal limit. Then we want to go and do something more fun, like eat lunch or walk around the plaza because, you get to see people in shops and, there's activity.
Or go ATV riding.
Or do something even more active. But the point is, that if we're like that as adults, you can imagine that that's very important for the kids, that they need to have differences of what kinds of things are happening. And that also goes in with keeping them informed. So you can say, as you're going into the museum, and I'm sure you would do this probably anyway, but you go in and say, here's a snack, have some little gummy fruits or whatever as you go in real quick, and then say, and we're going to go eat lunch afterwards. Mm-hmm. So start thinking about what you want, whether, if you're in Italy, should we go get pizza or do we want spaghetti, and start having them get ready for making it through there and knowing that at the end of that museum,
that's coming up.
Or that cathedral, that's coming up, and it's something to look forward to.
Well, and the other thing is, know what the highlights are before you go in, if possible. Get online, do a little bit of research. So you can make sure that you see what is really important to you in the museum, but also to give the children an idea of what to expect and what they're interested in seeing. Because what we've found is we tend to not have as much time in museums with children. You would think it would take longer, right? But you can't make a child of any age spend more time in a museum. It's just not going to work out.
Well, okay, so there's 4 of us. Well, there's more of us now because everybody's married and has kids, blah, blah, blah. But our basic family, there's 4 of us. And we have been in hundreds of museums together. And what we have found, and we love going to museums, what we have found, though, is that all 4 of us are interested in different parts of the museum. We're interested in different artists if we're going to an art museum. Mm-hmm. We're interested in reading more here and less here or whatever. We all go through kind of at a different pace. So what we decided early on, when the kids were old enough to be able to do this, probably, I'm going to say 11 or 12.
Yeah. I was going to say 10 or 11.
Yeah. I mean, that's up to you and your children, I guess.
We had been traveling their whole lives at that point.
Exactly. So the rule was you go through the museum. When you're done, you meet us here and we'll all be here no later than, say, an hour from then or an hour and a half or whatever. And if there's a cafe down there, that's perfect because, you can give them a couple euros, a couple dollars and say, get a drink and wait for us if you get here before we do. And what's wonderful about that is it's giving the kids that autonomy and they're growing up a little bit, but they're also not being bored by looking at the stuff that you're interested in instead of what they're interested in. And that really is a key thing too.
So really it's also about being flexible, being able to be spontaneous. But at the same time, you do want to pre-book as much as possible because you don't want to get in a situation where there's something that the child really wanted to do.
Or you wanted to do.
Or you too. And then you get there and find out that, you really needed to make a reservation or buy tickets in advance if you want to go in on that day. And you might find that you miss out completely in situations like that. So in the pre-planning stage, part of choosing where you want to go is looking at getting the tickets for it. And sometimes what we have found is even if you get there, you didn't pre-book at all, but you get in line and you start digging around and looking online. There's been several times we've been able to purchase the ticket while we're standing in line and then get out of line and
go through the
pre-purchase area. So keep that in mind, especially with kids, because standing in line is no fun for anybody, but it's especially no fun for kids.
And the last time it was really apparent to us that this worked well, buying tickets ahead of time, is we wanted to go to the underground war rooms in London. Mm. And we just decided this the day before because we didn't know how much time we were going to spend at different places. We decided, okay, the first thing we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to go to the war room. So Jim got online. He bought our tickets.
These are the Winston Churchill war rooms.
Yeah. He bought our tickets and we get there the next morning at opening. And there must have been 100 people in line.
It was way more popular than I expected
Exactly.
it to be.
And it was hot that day. It was mid-July. It was one of the hottest days that year. And we were like, do we have to wait in this line? No, I don't think that we do. So we bypassed this 150 people who are all sweating and miserable and looking at us like they wanted to kill us as we walked right through and got right in because we had pre-purchased. It is so important. It is important for your sanity. It's important for the kids' sanity.
Yeah, and I can understand why more people weren't doing that.
Right.
Because it wasn't hard. Some countries, it's very hard. If you're internationally traveling, it can be very difficult to book a ticket to something in Japan, for instance.
It can
where
be.
The language can
it's
really
true.
be a barrier. Japan's gotten much better with a lot more English on their websites, but
still,
you're going to run into that in different places.
Exactly.
But in England, I wouldn't have thought that was a problem. We didn't have any problem getting our tickets.
No,
Luckily,
I think people just don't think about it very much.
That's true.
It used to be you didn't have to pre-book anything. Nowadays, you have to pre-book pretty much everything. But that doesn't mean pre-book 6 months in advance usually. Sometimes it does, but most times you can do just as we did the night before when we made the decision of what we were going to do the following day.
Yeah. If we're traveling a lot, like on road trips, we'll usually reserve the hotel room like the first night and the last night. So we know, because we know those days for sure. But then,
not just that, but it just makes it easier stress-wise.
And also if we're flying into a location but not staying in that exact same location the whole time, we'll do the same thing. Book the flight, the day of the flight in, we'll book that hotel, and the day of the flight out, we'll book that hotel. That way we can still stay spontaneous and then just book the next hotel for the next night. Again, if we're moving around. If we're not, we try to book it as far out in advance as we can if we're staying in the same hotel.
Yeah,
because they fill up.
But if we're doing road trips, we still like to be spontaneous.
Definitely.
And I think we've still been pretty lucky. If you're going to someplace where it really makes a difference to you, or you want to go to a special hotel, then yes, book that way ahead of time. But if you want to, if you're on a road trip and you're not entirely sure when you're going to be where, just do it the day before, because you're usually a day out, you know where it is. We've even done it the morning before.
The morning of works is pretty good too.
But, if you can do it the day before, that's probably enough.
Yeah. There's only one time really that doing it the morning of was problematic.
Well, that's because you messed it up.
No, that's because we made the booking and the booking came through. But when we got there, they had given our room to somebody else, even though we got there on time and everything else. And they just said, sorry, you don't have a booking. We didn't get charged, so that wasn't a problem. But we were at the destination and then had to find a hotel.
Which is always a little bit more stressful.
And that can be more challenging in some places than others. So especially with children, you really want to try and have at least the next night nailed down.
Yeah. When we're traveling, especially internationally, maybe more so internationally, if we're traveling in the States, then of course the kids already know what they like and you know what they like. But if we're traveling to a new country, one of our first stops in any new country is the grocery store.
Yes.
We love food, as you know. I mean, that's just a given. But everybody loves food. And one of the most important things when traveling with the kids is having them have snacks. So what we do, I mean, of course, we've brought some snacks with us, but we want to go to a grocery store so they can pick out some snacks to try. And then they put those in their little backpack if they're carrying one or wherever, and then when they want to try something, they can try it and they've picked it and they want to try it on their own. And it's just it's fun to go see what differences there are. One of our new favorite things is getting all the different flavors of potato chips.
Yes.
Because no matter where you are in the world,
flavors out
there's
there.
definitely different ones. So that's really fun. But and then of course there's candies and cookies. I mean, anything that you talk about, like in Turkey. Oh my gosh. One of our favorite things is this marshmallow cookie, like marshmallow on top of a soft cookie, and it's individually wrapped, and it costs I don't know, like the equivalent of 2 cents or something. And you can get them, and we tried them and they're just so good. And we became addicted to them and that, or ice creams or whatever, but it's really, really fun. And the kids all get to try something different, and that's important to them. Again, they've got choice. They get their snacks and then they get to try it. Plus,
almost always find some fresh fruits, and there's a lot of healthy options too. So that's really cool.
Yeah. I'm not just saying get the bad stuff.
But we love going into the grocery stores.
We were in Spain and our friends said, you've got to try the persimmons. Well, we had come basically from Asia, and persimmons in Asia, if you haven't tried them, are rather tart.
Yeah. Tart, chalky.
Yeah. They're just,
I never found one that I really liked.
Eating them fresh is not my choice for an Asian persimmon. But when you dry them out and candy them or something, well, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. But in Spain, he's like, no, try it. And we're like, no, we've had plenty of persimmons. We'll pass.
But we tried it.
But finally, he convinced us that it's going to be delicious. And it was delicious. So apparently European persimmons are different than Asian, or at least Spanish ones are different than Asian ones. But I just thought that was so funny. So even as adults, we have to learn these things sometimes. And it's always good to just try. Anyway, so stopping at a grocery store is always a good idea.
It also gives you an idea of the cost of things in the country, just to walk through a grocery store and look at the prices for things that you're familiar with. So and do the conversion in your head so you can think of it in terms of dollars.
Well, can you give an example?
Well, for instance, a gallon of milk. You know how much a gallon of milk costs because
you're not going to buy a gallon in pretty much any place overseas.
But you're not going to buy that. But seeing what the cost of it is gives you an idea overall of what to expect for the prices of things throughout the economy. We used to do that with McDonald's cheeseburgers, and you still can, because you'll notice.
Yeah, but they change across the United States too.
Exactly. Well, cost of living changes across the United States. So it gives you an idea of the cost of living. We would just look at the price of a McDonald's cheeseburger or a Big Mac, either way, in the different places you go to. And speaking of food, a lot of people, Americans especially, have a hard time going to McDonald's when they're traveling.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
You want to eat locally, right?
Right. And we do think you should eat locally,
But if you're traveling with children, and even if you're not, I mean, there's some times where the reason McDonald's is as popular as it is why you're going to go. It's quick, it's cheap, and sometimes you just need a meal that's familiar.
There's usually plenty of seating. There's a bathroom. There's air conditioning in countries where you want air conditioning. The products, and the products are going to be the same if they're the same product. But they also, McDonald's is also very good. We're also not sponsored by McDonald's. Maybe we should be. But there's also local products there. Like in Japan, we were just in Japan, and they had a shrimp burger. Mm-hmm. And they had, what was the pie they had? Oh, they had a
taro pie.
Yeah, just different places. So it can be a cultural experience a little bit too. Even though I wouldn't necessarily go to McDonald's for the cultural experience.
But that is where the locals are eating.
Well, and I also think that if you've got somewhat of a picky eater who's been really good and doing things for you and trying things, and you're in a country, I mean, Italy's pretty easy, pizza and spaghetti. I mean, kids love that, not a problem. Germany might be a little bit harder. Even though we tell you in our blog post over and over again, it's not just sausages. There's lots of good food. It may not be stuff that they recognize as easily. I think that's true in the Netherlands. Obviously, the more
definitely in Asia, outside
of Western countries, even more so, like China or Italy or Vietnam or anywhere, Turkey, and yet the food is really good, but it's hard for them to try, and it's putting them out of their comfort zone. So, maybe you work in going to McDonald's once a week or something, or at least once during your trip, just because they will love it.
Well, and the other thing that goes along with that is, that McDonald's is going to be open at least from lunch through dinner. So if you get into a situation where maybe you took longer in one of the sites that you're at, and now it's 2:00,
and you're hungry.
In a lot of countries, in a lot of places around the world, you cannot find a restaurant that's open between 2:00 and 5:00. So in that point, then you're going to have to be looking for other options. And yeah, that could definitely fill one of those situations. But really, I guess where I'm going with that is you should really try to be aware of the situation where you're traveling. Is that a problem? Are the restaurants closed after lunch until dinner? And then make sure that you time it so that you can get to a lunch while it's open, because you don't want a hungry child.
Yeah, and there are usually, like we said, other options. You can usually go to a baker or a butcher that's open all during the day because they're selling things not just to eat.
Right.
But they might have stuff ready to eat. And also you can go to a convenience store. But it's not the same. It's certainly not the same.
And one of the reasons we travel is for the food.
Well, one of our
reasons. So you don't want to put yourself in the situation where you don't get to try the food.
A couple of little easy tips. If you are traveling with kids, always ask for a discount at every zoo, museum,
anywhere there's an entrance fee. If it's not on the sign, ask, because a lot of times you'll find that it is.
And if you're traveling with a larger group, sometimes, especially in the UK, I've seen this. They have like family rates too. So it might not be that just the child rate is the cheapest that you can go, but you can, since you have 3 kids and 2 adults, it might be cheaper to get the family. So just, if you're not sure, ask. Everybody understands that you want a discount when you have kids. It's easy. The other thing is with kids is to make sure that they have the contact info and know where you're staying, like the hotel info. Every time you check into a hotel, they give you a card, or there's a card sitting on the counter, and there should be one for each kid. And I would stick it in their coat pocket or in their jeans pocket when they're going out, so that if they do get separated from you, there's a hotel right there. And I would write my cell phone number on it as well.
The other thing is, hopefully you'll never need it, but you should have a small first aid kit with you all the time.
And medicines.
And medicine, especially, obviously, if your child is taking medication, or if you're taking medication, have that ready as well.
But even over the counter
But
stuff.
just
like
having
Tylenol.
it with you.
We had to go looking for Tylenol just recently.
That's right, for a headache.
And we had to go to 2 stores to find it.
Because it can be difficult to get what you need from a pharmacy. It can also be very simple and very easy to get things that you would think you couldn't get, like if you've lost your prescription medication, for instance. In a lot of pharmacies around the world, you can just walk into the pharmacy, have a picture of your medication. We always suggest that you take a picture of your medication before any trip and take
along
it in,
with your regular pill bottle.
and you can get a small amount to get you to a doctor, or even like a month's supply if you need it. So keep that in mind with your med kit. Even if you have to go find something, it can be done. But Band-Aids, bug spray, things like that.
Suntan lotion.
Sunblock, not suntan lotion.
Sunblock, yes. Because, for example, here in Vietnam, my grandson loves to go to the beach. So, of course, Erica and Michael bought him sunblock and smothered him with it. And it has this quality that leaves everything white. You know, I don't know why, but it does. So that's one thing. But the other thing was it didn't really work. He still got sunburn, and they had him slathered. So we ended up having someone bring us some who was coming from the States, because it really makes a big difference. So things like that you might want to think about beforehand.
Well, the next thing is, if you're crossing borders, do the research, find out if you're going to need extra paperwork. We were on a road trip from Alaska, and we drove into Canada across a border, I think up near Chicken or somewhere. It's really remote.
It was a small border.
Really remote. And the border control people there were giving us a really hard time. We had the passports.
Okay, so it was Jim and me, so both parents and our 2 children with 4 passports that all have the same names. And our kids are happily in the back, obviously not in any distress.
Yeah.
So this is the picture of us pulling up to the gate, the customs guard.
And we really had to talk our way through the border for some reason, because what they ended up telling us was that those really remote borders are the borders where estranged spouses, for instance, may have gone in, grabbed their kid, and were trying to leave with them. So I guess that's a thing. I don't know what kind of paperwork they would have rather we had, maybe birth certificates. As it turned out, of course, we were able to get through, and it ended up not being a big problem, but it added time.
And it was
really
a little
made us
disconcerting.
think. Yeah. And even times where we thought we had all the paperwork, like with the AFS student that we were traveling with.
Oh, yeah.
We still had problems. So know before you go, especially if you're like a grandparent taking a grandchild, a letter from the parents, power of attorney.
Not just a letter, usually a power of attorney is what you need.
Something like that will probably go a long way. And hopefully you'll never need it.
Right.
But you have it if you do.
And then I think the last thing we'll talk about is just kind of a fun thing. Although it can turn into tantrum time, and that is buying a souvenir.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody wants to buy a souvenir, but you have to sort of make your rules as a family and try and figure out what's going to work for you. Do you really want to haul around something from every little place that you've stopped? The Eiffel Tower, and then you go to the Louvre, and then you go to, whatever.
And they've all got a thimble or a shot glass.
Exactly.
Or a spoon or a patch.
Well, but you're already jumping to the fact that if you pick one thing, that there's something there all the time. So that's one thing you could do, is you could say, when you go, you can collect spoons, and you can get a spoon everywhere. So at least you've narrowed down the 158,000 things that they can buy to one.
And hopefully something small like that.
Yeah, and you have a little control over it. But you can also maybe say, or you can save up your money and buy something at the end. We're going to go shopping at the end. Be looking and and you can figure it out. But sometimes the end is not long enough for those little kids. So you really have to come up with a couple of different strategies so that, well, first of all, you don't want to spend all your time in souvenir stores anyway. There's so many more other shops and boutiques and things to see and things to eat that aren't in souvenir shops. So think about that before you go, and maybe, your child can pick a souvenir that they like. Okay, well, we have lots more tips.
Yeah, so this will be the end of part 1, and yeah, we'll look at some more podcasts in the future for more specific things for different age groups.
And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to join our private Facebook group, Streets and Eats, and ask the question there. And then we'll be sure to include it on our part 2 or part 3.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Streets and Eats. If you liked what you heard, please show us some love, hit the like button, and leave us a review. Maybe even subscribe so you don't miss any future podcasts. Also, we'd love it if you joined us on our Facebook private group, Streets and Eats, where we just have an ongoing conversation about all things travel. Ciao for now.